Not to be like the world, and not to be like the great majority of American Christians, but to be like Jesus Christ. I don't know why you're clapping. I'm talking about you.
What's wrong with you people? I'm serious.
You can't say amen, you ought to say ouch.
Hello, Humblebees. Welcome to Tulips and Honey.
Today, Humblebees, we have a very special guest. We're going to be talking with Professor Nancy Pearcey about her book, Love Thy Body. And I feel like I say book, but I really feel like this needs a bigger word than book. Like,
right.
You don't want to say like this is the Bible of this topic, but it almost feels like it's so like I used to have a book called the Bible of Pie Making, and it had everything you needed to know about the science of pie making, and so it was called the Bible of Pie Making, which is kind of a weird expression, but I feel like this book is almost like 7 books all put together. So Love Thy Body by Professor Nancy Pearcey. Professor Pearcey, thank you so much for joining us. We are so thankful to get the chance to talk with you today. And
thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Absolutely. My first question that I have to start with before we even talk about anything else is, was it difficult to sit down and write all of this? And what was it, like a process? Did it take a long period of time to get all of this information put together?
Actually, this is one of my favorite books to write, because since it was so I was touching on such controversial and sensitive issues, I had lots and lots of feedback from readers. So I had individual readers, and I had several reading groups. I had undergraduate students, and I had graduate students, and I had honors college students here at Houston Baptist University where I teach. I had homeschooling students. One summer, all the students who'd come home from college were willing to sit down with my book manuscript and read it through. I taught it at the College of Biblical Studies here in Houston, which is 80% minorities. So I got a unique perspective that way. And I taught it to a apologetics group. So that was the best part of writing this book, is that so much feedback. And that way I got lots of anecdotes too. People will say, oh, this is, they kind of expected a book on moral issues to have a lot of sort of just moral argumentation. And it's not. It's got lots and lots of stories and personal anecdotes. Largely for my students.
Oh, that's great.
So that, that warms it up and makes it much more personal.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got, you see the personal applications through all these stories.
Yeah, that's so important, because these topics, if we don't make it a personal thing, it can become a nasty sort of debate on these things. But whenever you make it personal like that, it changes it from a perspective debate against like sin to an actual discussion with a sinner that needs to hear a loving gospel presentation. And I have relatives and family members that are actually involved in various aspects of the different topics in this book, that I would be so thankful if somebody would talk to them in the same manner that you're explaining and teaching in this book. But speaking of getting personal, before we get too much more into depth to this, Professor, do you mind giving us a quick rundown of your testimony and how you came to faith?
Yeah.
I would love to. One of my favorite things to talk about.
Yay!
It really is, such a transformation in my life that it just shaped the whole rest of my life, and I love to talk about it. So I was raised in a Lutheran home, Scandinavian. So, Scandinavians are all Lutheran.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Oh, really? It's a state church in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. It's a state church.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure it still is, but for a long time it was. And so, if you meet somebody who's of Scandinavian, they're liable to be Lutheran.
Okay. So fascinating.
That also meant that there wasn't a lot of reality to it, because a lot of it was just cultural. It's kind of like Italians are all Catholic,
Yeah.
Right.
Dutch Reformed. I mean, Dutch people are all Reformed.
Yes, right.
Right. All does. Yes.
True.
So as a result, when I started asking questions in high school, I'm attending a public school. All my teachers are secular. All my textbooks are secular. Most of my friends are secular. And so I just started wondering, how do we know that Christianity is true? That's it. I wasn't being rebellious. And sometimes people say, oh, you just wanted to party more on the weekends. I literally had an honest question. How do we know that it's true? And unfortunately, I couldn't get any answers. I talked to a university professor who was a Christian, and I said, why are you a Christian? Just point blank. Why are you a Christian? And he said, works for me.
Oh, wow.
I said, that's it? That's all? And I had a chance to talk to a seminary dean, a Lutheran seminary dean, and all he said was, don't worry, we all have doubts sometimes.
Oh.
As if it was a psychological phase that I was out. And so when that was the level of the answers I got, I eventually decided that if I couldn't get good answers and get good reasons, then I should just lay my Christian background aside. Sure. And if you don't have good reasons, you should not say you believe it, whether it's Christianity or anything.
Absolutely.
So I did. I very consciously laid it aside and started on a search for truth. I decided, I guess it was up to me. And I literally started walking down the hallway at the public high school I attended and pulling books off the philosophy shelf.
Wow.
Maybe this is where people ask these questions. If I can't get any, living adults, maybe these dead guys.
Nice.
But, isn't philosophy where people are supposed to be trying to answer questions like, well, what is truth? And how do we know it? And is there meaning to life? Or is there a foundation for ethics? Or is it just, my truth versus your truth? And eventually I did decide that we were just on a rock flying through space with no purpose or meaning. Yeah. I became very secular, very relativistic. I was the one who was arguing with my friends in high school that there was no such thing as right or wrong.
Wow.
A friend says to me, we're talking about another person, and she's so wrong. And I jumped in saying, no, you can't say anyone's right or wrong. And I even got of outright skepticism because I thought, if all I have is my puny brain in the vast scope of time and space and history, how absolute truth? Impossible. Ridiculous. Right. It seemed clear to me that was not possible for us. Universal truth. In fact, in my high school class notes, I still have them. I started doodling the whole universe as a thought bubble inside my head.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Which, to give it a technical term, is solipsism. That all we really know is the inside of our head.
Right.
So when I went to, after high school, I went back to Europe. I had lived in Germany when I was a kid, and I wanted to go back, so I did. And it was when I was in Germany that I ended up going to L'Abri, which is in Switzerland, the Ministry of Freedom. And it's essentially an apologetics ministry. And people say, well, why'd you go to a Christian ministry if you were not a Christian? The answer is I had some relatives, family members who were traveling through Europe and who had stopped at L'Abri, and it said, hey, we're going to be at this place for the weekend. Why don't you come see us?
Oh, wow.
So that's how I ended up at L'Abri.
Not because Providence.
Not because I was going to L'Abri.
Wow.
Back then, it was much more open-ended, the structure was. And if they had a free bed, they would say, do you want to stay? And
wow.
A lot of questions. It was very clear I was not a Christian. And so, we have a free bed. You want to stay? Well, I had never met Christians who engaged intellectually, who had answers to the questions that I had. By then I had studied a lot of philosophy, and I knew no Christians who even spoke that language.
Wow.
And there were Christians who not only knew the answers, but actually knew the questions better than I did.
Wow.
That was mentioned. I was very relativistic, but I didn't know there was a label for that.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They say, what you're expressing here is moral relativism. That's the name of it. Here's where it comes from, and here's why it's wrong.
Right.
And I was blown away. I'd never met Christians who could do that.
Yeah.
And of course, Schaeffer's also well known for promoting the arts, the importance of the arts.
Mm-hmm.
And in Germany, I was attending the Heidelberg Conservatory for music, playing the violin. And so
that's cool.
his emphasis on the arts was really impressive. And then, of course, at that time, this was 1971, at that time, everyone there was a hippie.
Nice.
Were you a hippie?
Yeah, I had hair down to my waist.
Oh, wow. I would love to see a picture of that. That is so cool.
I'll send you one.
Thank
Yes.
you. Oh, my goodness.
Listen, guys, this is so amazing. I actually found a photo of me at L'Abri in March 1971 on the internet.
No way. How did you find it?
I was looking for images of L'Abri for a PowerPoint presentation I was giving, and there was a bunch of photos of people I knew, and suddenly there was me. That was me.
That's
so
cool.
I have a photo of myself. So in other words, somebody else was there at the same time. And
did they know that it was a picture of you whenever they posted it, or was it just like they were just posting any pictures of back then?
We get them to come. I haven't been able to get them to respond to me. They just posted them on, with some, not their real name, of course. So,
Sorry.
You have to realize back then, number one, hippies were the cool kids.
Right.
So that was impressive. And secondly, back then, nobody had really, no Christian organization had yet figured out how to reach across that cultural divide and reach out to these disaffected young people from the drug culture.
Right.
And so that really piqued my curiosity, because I thought, who are these Christians that these hippies are willing to come and listen to them and talk with them? In fact, I was so impressed. I was so impressed that I left.
Nice. Was it bothering you too much?
Well, I stayed a month, and then I was afraid I might be drawn in emotionally, because it was so attractive. It was so appealing. I'd never seen any. And then I should say the final thing too is just that you lived in people's homes. So you saw Christianity lived out day by day. Schaeffer wasn't just a talking head who flew in and spoke at your conference. You lived in his home.
Wow, that is great.
And it grew as the other people who wanted to join the ministry, converted at L'Abri, would say, we'd like to be part of this ministry. So they would buy a chalet nearby. All the homes in the Swiss Alps are chalets. They would buy a chalet nearby. It sounds like a luxury home, but it's not.
It does, actually.
It does. Sounds very fancy, yeah.
But no, the families live in chalets in the Swiss Alps.
Gotcha.
So they would buy a chalet nearby and open their home. And so you really were living in people's homes. And many people say that as important as the apologetics was, it was equally important that they were seeing Christians day in and day out exhibiting a quality of love and community that they had never seen before.
Yeah.
And so I would say that was true for me too. That was also incredibly impressive. So all that to say that after a month, I felt intense emotional pressure to try to make a decision. And I understood it well enough intellectually to make a decision. Christianity had let me down before already, right? Yeah. And so I was not going to take this step unless I was absolutely convinced intellectually that it was true. Not just appealing, not just emotionally attractive, but really true. And so to get some mental distance, I left. But because of being at L'Abri, I had discovered there was such a thing as apologetics. And so eventually, just on my own reading, I decided I was intellectually convinced. I had read enough that I was convinced. And then I thought, okay, well, where do I find other Christians? Because I was all on my own. I was doing this all on my own. I didn't know. I was not connected to a church or anything. So I thought, well, I knew some back at L'Abri. And so a year and a half later, I went back to L'Abri and stayed 4 months. And that's where I really got grounded in my understanding of Christian worldview. and what it meant to live as a Christian and so on. And so really, all of my writing, all of my life has been shaped by that. And as you really know, if you read my books, some of shaped themes like this view of truth just run through all of my books. I discovered this. Your view of truth is so central; it affects everything else.
Yeah.
And that's where my passion for apologetics comes from. I really want to reach out to young people who are having the same kind of questions I was having.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I'm also thinking like during the 70s, that was the time of the Jesus movement, right? And so it's so interesting. So Lauren and I we were Pentecostals or Word of Faithers before becoming Reformed. And I'm so curious how you escaped that. You bypassed the whole... Yeah.
Well, I didn't encounter the Jesus absolutely.
Okay. So you already had a solid foundation by that point.
Right.
Exactly. So I already had an understanding of Christian worldview, that Christianity was truth for all of life, that it was emotionally compelling, of course.
Right.
But it was much more than that. And so you're right. I have talked to friends who had a hard time getting out of a much narrower, maybe fundamentalist or Pentecostal worldview.
Sure.
And you know what? There's another factor. Lutheranism, the Lutheranism I grew up with was not American evangelicalism.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's much more classic Reformation Protestant. That at the time, I thought evangelical just meant anyone who's a conservative, Bible-believing Christian.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
But it's only when I came back to the States, and actually it was when I started working at a big Christian ministry that I discovered American evangelicalism has its own flavor. It's not the same as Reformation Protestantism.
Right.
In fact, I have a whole section on that in my book, Total Truth, because I was trying to figure out what is it that makes American evangelicalism so distinct.
Oh, wow.
Some of the things that you're probably thinking of already, like the emotionalism, the emphasis on experience, the individualism, the anti-intellectualism. I didn't really encounter that until I started working at a big Christian ministry, and I thought, why do these people think so differently? I don't think like these people.
Right?
Oh, that's so great.
That's so interesting. Yes.
This is from your book, Total Truth. Okay, I'm going to write that down too.
Yeah, I know, me too. Seriously.
I think I'm currently working on Finding Truth, so that would be a different one.
Yes, so Total Truth. I do have a whole section. I 3 or 4 chapters on the history of evangelicalism, because Total Truth is looking at why have we lost the sense of total truth. That Christianity is true for all of life. Why have we kind of compartmentalized it in the religious sphere? Right. Christianity is what you do at church and what you do in your Bible study. It applies maybe to your moral decisions, but people don't see how it applies to education and politics and economics and the arts and so on. They don't see it as a worldview that applies to all of life. And I was trying to figure out, where did that come from? Why do we have this compartmentalization? And so I looked at history, because when you see something developing historically, often it makes more sense. You can see it growing gradually, and it helps you to interpret it. So I went through the history of American evangelicalism, which was shaped especially by the 2 Great Awakenings. And the Great Awakenings were great. They were good in the terms of a lot of people did come to a deeper Christian commitment. There weren't a lot of atheists back then, so it was largely people coming to a deeper Christian commitment. But it also had some negative baggage, and that was it tended to redefine Christianity as an intense emotional conversion experience.
Right.
It tended to underplay the intellectual side of doctrine and theology and so on. And that's what we're still stuck with now then, is that we still have a sort of anti-intellectual approach in evangelicalism to a large extent. And, you guys are Reformed now, so you understand that. The Reformed tradition has, historically, the Reformed tradition has had a larger intellectual component and has a larger, especially since Kuyper's Princeton lectures, it was the reform brought the concept of worldview to America.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's taken a long time for evangelicals to sort of pick up on it and say, oh wow, we need this too.
Right. Absolutely.
Yes.
I think that's why it was such a draw for us. Like, I don't want to speak for you, Becca, but for me, for sure, after coming out of like a decade-long sentence in the prison of nonsense, to get to have reason and logic was so refreshing to me, to have things explained in a way that actually makes sense instead of just a pure emotionalism. It was very attractive to me for that, like that purpose. And of course the leaning on scripture was very good. Yeah, that's really cool. I'm excited about that book then. I mean, I'm excited about all of your books, but
yes, me too. I know, I got one right here.
You do, yeah.
I got Finding Truth. I'm so excited.
Yes, yeah, I have that one. I got it in the Kindle version whenever it was
Kindle
on sale. Yeah, and I was like, oh, it's on sale.
It's on sale. And Cave to the Cross, they mentioned about it. Tony, and I asked him about what book to get. He said Finding Truth would be the number one to read. So.
Yes. They're podcasts that only do books. They're very like philosophically minded, and so they go through one book at a time per chapter. So it was a high honor. Your book was at the tippy top of their list.
Yes. So I immediately ordered it.
What you will like about Finding Truth is that I show how all the major apologetics arguments really get their foundation in Romans 1.
Oh.
So it's not just
Romans 1.
I don't know about you, but because I became a Christian through apologetics, through being intellectually convinced, I did feel a strong responsibility to try to answer all other objections I might run into.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And you also felt like you had to be, as a matter of intellectual honesty, you had to be open to finding out that Christianity could be false, that there could be good reasons against it.
Sure.
And so, in fact, I tell my students this sometimes. I say, if you ran into an argument that really seemed persuasive to you, that Christianity wasn't true, would you give it up? And the room always gets really quiet. Because we've all been taught, basically, have faith, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you've really encountered an argument you couldn't answer that seemed to show Christianity was false, you would take 5 years to think about it because it's that important.
Right.
Intellectually honest, you would have to say that you would give it up. Otherwise, you're not holding it because you're convinced it's true. You're holding it for emotional reasons or social reasons, your friends are at church or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So if you're really believing it because it's true, then you would have to say if you ever were persuaded it was not true, you would give it up. Well, after writing Finding Truth, I realized I will never encounter an objection or an alternative worldview that would be persuasive.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is, in Romans 1 says, if somebody does not worship the God of the Bible, the Creator, then they will have to worship something in creation. Romans 1 says they will exchange the glory of God for something in creation. Yeah. An idol of some kind. And logically speaking, if your worldview starts with something in creation, of course, these days we don't typically worship golden calves, but but it can be anything in creation. So, for example, modern materialism says the ultimate reality is matter. That matter is the ultimate, the uncaused cause of everything else, the source of everything that exists. And so in that sense, matter takes the place of God, functions as the role of God in their system of thought. Well, is matter part of the created order? Of course it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Materialism fits the definition of an idol from Romans 1.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the key. You can be absolutely confident that any worldview that starts with something in creation will be falsified. It will not be big enough to explain all of reality. Why? Because it's a part of creation.
Right.
It's like having a box. You have a box of matter, and anything that doesn't fit in your box is not real. So mind, moral sense, free will, spirit, even consciousness today, that's in conscious and cognitive science right now, the cutting edge idea is even consciousness is not real. So anything that doesn't fit in your box of matter is said to be not real. Well, what that means is any box that starts with something in the created order will be too small. It will not be big enough to account for everything that exists. And what is the worldview supposed to do? It's supposed to explain the world.
Right.
Actually experience it. So only the transcendent God will give us a perspective that's big enough to include all of reality and all of human experience.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So you can be totally sure you will never encounter a worldview that you can't ultimately answer.
Yeah, mind blown. Is that what you start off with in your class?
Oh, I have a couple different classes, so
wow.
It is in one of my classes, yeah.
Awesome. What classes do you teach?
Well, so I teach a class on Lewis and Schaeffer.
Oh, okay.
Which many students say is their favorite class. They were the two major apologists of the 20th century in terms of the sheer number of people that they influenced, either through a crisis of faith or to become a Christian. And so I figure we may as well try to figure out what did they do right.
Right.
Sure.
Why did they influence so many people? So I have a course going into depth. And I think that's where I teach both total truth and finding truth, because what I want to do is I want to teach my students not just to learn what did they say, but how can you build on it? How can you take it further? Because that's what all of my books have done. They've essentially said, okay, here's some key insights. Well, I quote both of them pretty much, but I got started with Schaeffer. But here's their key insights, but you don't just leave it there. You don't just do historical studies on what they said. You say, how do we use that now to interpret our day? How do we use that? How can we deepen their insights? How can we reapply them to our own day? And so my books, in a sense, show my students how to do that.
Oh, wow.
But
Awesome.
I think in my Lewis and Schaeffer class, therefore, that I teach both total truth and finding truth. And then I have a course on my book, Love Thy Body.
Oh, awesome.
About in a minute. And basically, I just stretch it out over the semester, and I have my students read all my favorite original sources. First-hand experience to the really profound thinkers that I for the book. I really like that. They get a lot of first-hand exposure to what's happening today with those issues. This is the first book I've ever written where every day there's something in the news related to my book.
Right. Yes. Absolutely, there is. So
that's kind of fun, because in my course on Love Thy Body, we're constantly relating it then to current events.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Then I have a core course, which is apologetics. We have in the master's program. Naturally, we have sort of a historical core, ancient thought, medieval thought, modern, postmodern, and I teach modern, postmodern.
Oh, neat.
Where I teach my book, The Soul of Science, because they have to understand how science has really shaped the modern world. And that's where I teach my book, Saving Leonardo.
Oh,
Saving Leonardo shows how philosophy, in a sense, you get an idea of all of Western thought and culture.
Yeah.
You get a big overview. I have my students actually do a timeline, because in Saving Leonardo, we show the connections between the scientists and the philosophers and the visual artists, painters, and the novelists, and the poets, and the composers.
Wow.
Show how they were all, each one of them is working within and expressing certain worldviews. And so even my honors college students say they really didn't get the big picture.
Oh, wow.
Intellectual thought and culture until they went through Saving Leonardo and did the timeline. In fact, they say they take their timeline into their other courses after that. Help them to see, okay, where did these ideas come from? And okay, where do these ideas fit historically? And how did this group of thinkers affect this group of thinkers who affected this group of thinkers? Right. You see the interconnections. Often philosophy is taught in little silos. Okay, this or like charts.
Yeah.
Right.
Charts. I hate those charts. Here's a little pre-digested of this ism. So just memorize this and you'll be fine.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And charts and or parallel columns like that, really, they don't show the interconnections. But, as Schaeffer used to always emphasize, all of Western thought is interconnected. This guy influences this guy, who influences this guy. And if you get the interconnections, you'll understand so much better. And what's the whole goal of it? The whole goal of it is to understand the secular so that you can convey the gospel better. You need to know, as anyone in communications know, the first principle of effective communication is know your audience. So the only way you're going to know your secular audience well enough to really communicate the gospel is if you understand the whole history of Western thought, how these ideas developed, and how they influence the person who's sitting right next to you that you're trying to talk to. And that's the ultimate goal. So the ultimate goal is evangelism.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I love that you're a woman writing these books to help us to share the gospel. Like, I just love that.
Yeah,
that's always the goal. I'm in an academic setting now, where I have to admit it's not the goal of everyone in Christian academia, and to which there are philosophy professors who say, learn what Descartes said, learn what Kant said, learn what Plato said, and reproduce it on the test. And that's not my reason for being here at all.
Right.
My reason is like Schaeffer did. Schaeffer in his books, if you understand intellectual history so that you can communicate the gospel, but you can anticipate people's objections, you can understand what concepts they're not going to understand. You're going to, how do you translate Christian truth into language they will understand? That's why you need to understand, philosophy or intellectual history. It sounds it's maybe sounds kind of highfalutin, but that's, but that's the goal of understanding, so that you can ultimately talk to this person that's sitting right in front of you in an empathetic way and understand how they think.
Yeah, that's great. It's got so much more intellectual, honesty to it if you can actually talk to them about their perspective and understand their perspective. And I've struggled with that because postmodernism is very weird to me.
Yeah.
But your book is actually very helpful. So let's get into your book a bit, at the Love Thy Body, because that does help with that exact issue of trying to talk to these people without misunderstanding. So the Love Thy Body it's got 7 very meat-filled chapters. So what is a summarization of what this book is actually about, in a whole?
Right. So my goal was to help Christians get past the negative stereotypes that are so common. And one reason they're so common is because we have mostly a negative message, namely, don't do it, it's a sin, it's wrong, and there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And that's what usually comes across. And so I show in this book how to craft the Christian ethic in a positive way, showing that the Christian ethic actually depends on a much higher view of human nature, the significance and value of human life, and especially the human body, since all of these ethical issues involve the human body. People tend to think that Christians have a negative or a low view of the body. Like, this body doesn't matter, this life doesn't matter. All that matters is getting to heaven, where we're not going to have a body anyway. We're going to float around in the clouds. And so, or even worse, one of my students put it this way: growing up in the church, I was always taught spirit good, body bad.
Oh, yeah. It's dualism. That's not Christianity.
Exactly. So I show that that's not the case, that in fact the Christian ethic is based on a very high view of the body, a high view of the creator, a high view of our biological sex and our biological identity. So that was the overarching goal, was to help Christians reframe their message in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does do that. I love that about this book. It really, you've hit the nail on the head, I think, for sure, in all the different aspects. So you can't caricature these people after you've read this, and you've read it read it from their perspective. So one of the first issue that I had whenever I became a Christian, a genuine Christian, is I spent over a decade as a false convert. But when I became a genuine Christian, and I knew already that abortion was wrong, but I didn't understand the reasons behind it. I just, that was just something that they said, abortion wrong. Like you just mentioned, like you're always told the negatives of everything, like don't do it, it's wrong. But I was almost embarrassed to talk about it at first. And I found that as I grow in my faith and as I grow in sanctification, all of the things that bothered me once to talk about now are things that I'm so passionate and concerned about that I actually look forward to the opportunity. But your chapter about abortion is, I found myself crying through it. Just the idea of abortion in general is such a heartbreaking thing to have to deal with, but to hear it from this kind of perspective and to know that there are ways that we can have this discussion without just bulldozing over the issues. So, can you give us some examples of the ways that abortion actually, rather than giving women rights, actually destroys human rights?
Yeah, and I was interested to hear your own personal history, because that was mine as well. Even though I became a Christian after going to L'Abri, it took several years before I figured out what was really at stake in abortion. And like you, I was embarrassed to talk about. I was way too embarrassed to use the word pro-life.
Oh yeah,
Right.
Because I had never heard an intelligent case for abortion. I'd heard only emotional appeals. So it wasn't until after, frankly, I was married and had a kid before I realized what was wrong with abortion. And again, it was Francis Schaeffer who changed my view on this when he went on the country video series, at that time film series, Whatever Happened to the Human Race. And at any rate, where the issue is today, most people don't realize this, but where the issue is today is that professional bioethicists agree that life begins at conception. That's actually not the issue anymore. Many people are still stuck back there arguing that the fetus is human. Professional bioethicists all agree that the fetus is human. The evidence from DNA and genetics is just too strong to deny it. So what they will say is, there was an article I quote in Love Thy Body, where the title was, "So What If Abortion Ends Life?"
Right.
And that captures the attitude now of many, not just professional bioethicists, but it's filtering now down to, like, that was a feminist writer. She was just a journalist. What they say is, being human is not enough to qualify for legal protection. The fetus has to earn the right to life by becoming a person, which is usually defined in terms of cognitive abilities. So a certain level of awareness, certain mental functioning, and so on. But notice what the implication there is. As long as the fetus is merely human, biologically human, genetically human, physiologically human, it's really nothing more than a disposable piece of matter to be born with. Because any reason or no reason, it can be used for research and experiments. It can be tinkered with genetically. It can be picked through for sellable body parts, as Planned Parenthood does, and then tossed out with the other medical waste. And that's exactly how medical research refers to the fetus. They call it medical waste.
Yeah.
So the point here then is that being human is no longer enough for human rights. And this is actually called personhood theory, meaning you have to become a person before you have human rights.
Right.
And the reason this is so dangerous, of course, is that it used to be that being human was a pre-political right. That means it's something that you have and that the government does not confer on you. The government really recognizes it. What's happened with abortion is that being human is you no longer have the right to life just because you're human, just because you're a member of the human race. What Roe v. Wade in 1973 really did was to say you can be human and still not qualify as a person.
Right.
And therefore you do not qualify for human rights. So all that to say, the government now decides who qualifies for human rights. Instead of acknowledging that you already have a right to life because you're a human being, the government is now saying you only have the right to life if I say so.
Right.
Gosh.
Philosophically, this is a huge shift. You and I no longer have the right to life just because we're human beings.
That is crazy.
Only if the government acknowledges that we're persons.
Wow.
How is this any different than the 3/5 vote? That, I mean, when the nation was first formed and we had inalienable rights, but we still had to fight for a certain group to have actual inalienable rights, and they were given a 3/5 of a vote instead of a full personhood. How is that different? Because I've had this conversation with people who are actually pro-choice, and they'll all say, well, that's completely different. That's not the same thing. Those were real people. Babies aren't real people. But I can't see a distinction between saying the government gets to decide whenever you're human and the government gets to decide whenever you're human enough to vote. So it seems like we've actually gone backwards. They call it progressive, but it doesn't feel like we're progressing anywhere. It sort of seems like we're just going backwards.
That's why it's so dangerous. As soon as the government can decide who qualifies as a legal person, they will acknowledge that it's human, like the fetus, or like the example you're mentioning, the slave. They acknowledge that it's physiologically, genetically human. This creature, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
but they'll say it's not a person.
Right.
And you're absolutely right. In that sense, it is an exact parallel. This person's, you can't use human or person.
I know.
Right. Yeah.
This human, okay, they do acknowledge it's human. So let's say that this human being standing before me, or in the mother's womb, we'll acknowledge as a human being, but it's not a legal person. It's exactly parallel, and it could be any other group. In fact, I mean, if we go through history, almost every civilization has had some groups of people that they do not acknowledge as truly persons. It can be one of another ethnic group. It could be the enemy tribe over there.
Yeah.
It could be someone of a different race.
Sure.
Throughout history, that's happened again and again, that some group has been designated as sub-personal, not truly personal.
Wow. Right.
And we know what happens once some group is delegated to, denigrated to the realm of less than fully persons, and that is they get oppressed, they get enslaved, they get killed, they get massacred. I mean, that's the course of human history. So we know what happens when any group is designated as less than full persons. History is replete with examples.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And the irony, what makes it so wicked to me, and I don't know if this is just the way that my brain works, is that we have a group of people today claiming to be the morally high, like that they're standing on the moral high ground with this. They are the ones that are actually giving the most rights to women, and it feels so yucky. It just feels icky to me for the most intellectual word I can find. It feels icky for somebody to claim to be on the moral high ground while ignoring history and repeating history at the same time. And it does flow into the next question about euthanasia, because it never stops. It doesn't end in just one place. Nobody likes the slippery slope argument.
Right.
But
that was going to be my next question.
Is it really?
Yeah, I was going to be like, well, like the government's already defining that. Is the next step where we're going to become like, isn't it in parts of or when it's Down syndrome?
Oh yeah, those Iceland. Yeah.
Iceland. Yeah. Is that where America is headed towards?
Well, euthanasia, it's not just a slippery slope. It is, when something is philosophically exactly the same, then it's logic. It's not a slippery slope, it's logic. Euthanasia is also being driven by personhood theory. Because the theory says if you're mentally disabled, If you lose a certain level of cognitive functioning, then you're no longer a person, even though you're obviously still human. So the classic case that many people still remember was the best known euthanasia case in recent years was the 2005 Terri Schiavo.
Terry, yeah.
Terry, oh yeah.
Terri Schiavo, and she was a young woman who suffered brain damage, and her family, her immediate family, wanted to take care of her, but her husband wanted her dead. He wanted her food and water denied so that she would die, and the huge controversy in the media. And there was one program on television called Court TV, and a bioethicist from the University of Florida was asked, "Do you think person?" And he said, "No, I do not."
Wow.
I think cognitive awareness is essential for being a person. Now, anyone looking at Terri knows that, yes, she lost some cognitive functioning, but she is still human. Obviously, she didn't become an alien species.
Right. Yes.
So essentially what personhood theory applied to euthanasia is saying that once you are no longer a person, even though you're still human, you are only a body. That's a phrase I got from one bioethicist. This is only a body. And you can be unplugged, your treatment withheld, your food and water discontinued, and your organs harvested. So once again, being not enough for human rights.
Yeah.
So I was invited once on an NPR program in San Francisco, which I thought could be a challenging audience.
Yes, absolutely.
And the producer was quizzing me ahead of time on my views, and he asked me about abortion and euthanasia. And my response was that the liberal position on it says some people don't measure up, they don't make the cut, they don't qualify for the status of personhood. And I said the pro-life position is inclusive. It says if you're a member of the human race, you're in, you count. You have the full status of personhood. Every human is a person. I was promptly disinvited from the program.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, they didn't continue with it?
So they never aired it. So
they really could have used that.
Chickens.
You see, what they did not like the fact that I was using liberal buzzwords like exclusive and inclusive.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Because their view was actually the exclusive one.
Right. Yeah. But I feel like, did nobody read Dr. Seuss when they were little? Because a person is a person no matter how small. Like, that was drilled into me as a little kid. Was I just in a weird home, or what was that? I don't understand. Like that was a big deal growing up. A person is a person no matter how small. But it is so ridiculous to say that, and arbitrary to say that the government gets to decide when a person is a person. And the thing that bothers me the most about the Terri Schiavo case was the starvation part. Like, you weren't just saying that she didn't deserve life, but that she didn't even deserve just the common decency that we would expect to give to anyone else. Like, the people who are claiming that these things are okay, I guarantee you, if it becomes their spot to now be in that place, and it's now their turn to be starved, they're all of a sudden going to change their mind really quickly about who is a person and who's not a person. It's amazing to me that it's just the people who aren't in that situation and have never been put in that situation to decide. But my husband works in the hospital, and he sees people come in from all ranges of like thought processing, where some of them are unable to talk but can still think very clearly, and then vice versa. And he's been held under oath to do no harm to all of them. They're all human beings under his oath that he has to do no harm to. So I don't understand how doctors are able to now say, well, I can do no harm, but I'm going to kill this one, and I'm going to kill, and this one I'm going to starve. That one I think I'll just go ahead and starve over here. So I don't see how that follows with their own oaths. But this thread continues throughout the book. You do a really great job of continuing this thought, but you actually bring it next into what is a very, for me personally, difficult subject. I have a close sibling that is a homosexual, and so for me, this is one of those topics that I was so thankful to see you address in this line, in this same thread of humanity, of being a human being. So can you flesh that out a little bit for our listeners of how homosexuality ties into the same thing as abortion and euthanasia?
Right. So essentially what the argument is in abortion and euthanasia is a division between, being a body and being a person. Mm-hmm. And homosexuality rests on that same division. Even my homosexual friends will agree that biology, on the level of the body, physiology, anatomy, chromosomes, males and females are counterparts to one another. That is how the human sexual and reproductive system is designed. So when you embrace a same-sex identity, essentially what you're saying is it's okay to contradict that design. That you're essentially saying, why should my body inform my identity? Why should my biological sex as male or female have any say in my moral choices? Help people to see that this is a profoundly disrespectful view of the body. And of course, by pitting the mind against the body, it's also creating internal fragmentation and self-alienation. And so our response should be, why accept such a demeaning view of the body? The Christian ethic is holistic. My argument in Love Thy Body is to help Christians make the argument that Christianity has a high view of the body. Our mind and emotions are meant to be integrated instead of alienated. They're meant to be integrated, and that the Christian ethic actually leads to an internal sense of wholeness and self-integration. And so it gives people that positive language to argue for a Christian ethic. I give several examples. Like I said earlier, there's lots of stories in the book, and one of my favorite actually is at the beginning of the chapter. There's a young man named Sean who grew up exclusively attracted to other males, and today is married and has 3 children and is a Christian. And
that's cool.
And so you say, well, what changed? His story is particularly interesting because he grew up in a gay-affirming family and attended a gay-affirming church. So he was not driven by any sense of shame or guilt. And you say, well, what changed then? He said, I stopped treating my sexual feelings as my identity. And instead, I started basing my identity on my body as a good gift from God. He said, I didn't try to change my feelings directly because that doesn't usually work.
Right.
I had to accept what I already had, which was a male body, and to accept that God had made me that way for a reason. Clearly, God had made me for a sexual relationship with a woman. That's what my body was saying. Yeah. And so I decided that if I was going to say that God was good and God's creation is good, then I had to try to accept my body as a source of my identity, that I was a man. And he said, eventually my feelings started to follow suit.
Wow.
So this is really, when we talk about the worldview that's behind these, this is a worldview that's at stake. At the core of this issue is, are we the product of blind material forces, and therefore our bodies have no moral message, our bodies have no meaning of significance? Or are we the product of a loving creator who had a purpose when he made us male or female, and his creation is therefore, he's a good God, and therefore his creation is intrinsically good, and we do have a moral obligation to respect the person that God made us to be, the body that he gave us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my goodness. I'm just like, taking it in.
Yes.
And let me give you, by the way, just to show you, this isn't just academic. There is a very outspoken lesbian who makes this exact argument.
Oh, wow.
Camille Paglia. You may have heard of her. Yeah, she's a fairly well-known public intellectual, and she's lesbian. In fact, these days she's starting to say that she's transgender.
Oh, wow.
But the underlying question is, your view of ethics is based on your view of nature, because our bodies are part of nature.
Right.
And so the liberal secular ethic derives from the view that nature is a product of mindless, purposeless forces, and therefore the body has no intrinsic purpose that we're morally obligated to respect. And here's the key, then catch the logic. If that's the case, then the mind is free to do with it whatever it wants.
Right.
And Camille Paglia makes exactly that argument. On the one hand, she's a little bit idiosyncratic because of the feminist. She does not accept that male and female gender is a social construction. She says, no. Nature made us male and female.
Yeah, wow.
Humans are a sexually reproducing species. So then you ask, how does she defend being a lesbian then?
Right.
And here's her exact words. She says, why not defy nature? After all, fate, not God, has given us this flesh. We have absolute claim to our bodies and may do with them as we see fit. So she's basically making the argument that if the universe is created by blind material forces, then why let nature dictate who we are and what we do? Because there's no purpose within nature.
Right.
But the Christian worldview says, no, nature itself exhibits a plan, an order, a design, a purpose. And by the way, it shows us this as well. I mean, eyes are made for seeing, ears are made for hearing, wings are made for flying, fins are made for swimming.
Yes.
The development of the organism is driven by an inbuilt genetic plan or blueprint. So science itself underscores the Christian understanding of nature.
Sure.
So what Christians are saying is when we live in accordance with that purpose, we're going to be healthier and happier.
And where do they get fate even? Like how do they even get that? Because it seems like that goes back to what you're saying at the beginning, that they're still going to worship something. Like they're still trying to fit something in a box that isn't.
It sounds like Jurassic Park or something.
Well, Camille Paglia does identify herself as a pagan.
Okay.
And so, whereas a scientist might just talk about blind natural laws,
right?
She uses the word fate, but nonetheless, she's essentially meaning there was no purpose or meaning behind our creation.
Right.
Again, the logic is, you see, that Christians look at nature, and when most scientists were still Christian, they looked at nature as God's handiwork, and then saw the purpose of human life is to live in accordance with God's plan or God's purpose.
Sure.
But the secular scientist looks at nature and says, no, it's just, blind mechanical forces. Why should we feel like we have any obligation to live the way nature tells us to live?
Right.
In fact, like Paglia says, why not defy nature? She actually says we become more human when we counter our natural impulses. And so yes, I'm female. I was clearly made for sexual relationships with a male, but why should I take my cues from nature? Oh,
geez. But if you follow her line of reasoning and she says you become more human if you do it her way, why not defy that? And be, heterosexual. It's an interesting line. And I love how with these type of people, whenever you talk to them about that, they feel very intellectual about what they're saying. But whenever you just sort of like ask some simple questions, then you get uninvited from NPR.
Again, just to give us positive language, one of my other favorite anecdotes in the book is a woman whose name was Jean, and she lived as a lesbian for many years. And then she said, today she's married and has 2 children. She said, and it was fascinating because her reasoning was very similar. She said, God made me, I came to trust, that's her words, I came to trust that God had made me female for a reason. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to, let me see if I can remember her exact words. I wanted to honor my body. That's how she put it. I wanted to honor my body by living in accord with the Creator's design.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this is really what I want Christians to take away from the book, is the positive language, honoring my body, living in accord with the Creator's design, respecting the way God made me. In fact, after writing the book, I found another phenomenal news article. It was by a woman who lived as a transsexual for 10 years. She passed as male for 10 years.
Wow.
And then and she lived under the name Jake. And then you can find the story in the Christian Post. This was fairly recent. That she became a Christian. But she did not immediately think that meant that she had to recover her birth identity as a woman.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Sometimes it's like you said about being not seeing that abortion was wrong right from the beginning, and myself as well. It took her a while, and this is fascinating because this Bible study group loved her and accepted her and worked with her, even though she was not seeing it yet. They didn't demand that she immediately changed. They nurtured her spiritually, and it was only I think it was a couple of years into being a Christian before she said, I wanted to be a real man of God.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yes.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. And what were some ways like the church helped her in that? Like, I'm so curious, like if we have someone at our local church that's, either transitioned for a long time, and how do we help them as members?
Well, in her account, I only have her account from this one article. They didn't say much at all. They just loved her and accepted her and nurtured her. And there were two times when that God himself seemed to speak directly to her. She was reading in Revelation about the name that God gives you, and he said, "What?" And she felt a sense that God was saying, "What would your name be?" And of course, she knew that would be her female name, not her male name.
Wow.
But the turning point came when she sensed God saying to her. She was just praying, just on her own. She sensed God saying to her, "You cannot claim to love me, but reject my creation."
Wow.
In other words, her body as female was his creation. And you cannot claim to love me and yet reject my creation.
Wow. That is so huge. I get rebuked a lot in prayer too. That's a great example. Anytime I go to prayer and I think maybe I know what I'm talking about, and I go to prayer and then I leave with a lot more to repent of than I started. That's such a great story, because you do tell a story in the chapter of transgenderism that about a man who actually, and I can't remember his name, I have the worst memory ever, but he's actually like booted out, right, where he's gone to a church and they don't want him there. They're like, your kind's not welcome here, and he's like just trying to understand Christianity and grow in the grace and the knowledge of our Lord, but that particular church wasn't having it. So it seems like this church maybe had a better idea of the right way to handle these. But we do need to handle this, because I'm concerned. The reason I love your book is the next generation coming up. We're both, Beck and I are both millennials, of the Z-Gens. I'm not even talking about them. I'm talking about the generation before the Z-Gens. This is going to be completely normal. It's going to be normal.
Yes.
We're going to have to deal with this in the church to a higher degree than we have before. And so I love that your book addresses this, and that we're seeing the positive way to respond. Human beings naturally don't respond well to negativity. That's why.
That's true.
The the abortionists, they call themselves pro-choice. They want to make them about they're the positive side of it. And so the Bible does have things that we can't do, but for the majority of it, what we're hearing is a very positive message. I mean, what could be more positive than the good news of the gospel? It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, so transgenderism has the same divide between the body and the person. You know, that we saw in abortion, euthanasia, homosexuality. And in fact, it's even more obvious because transgender activists themselves argue that gender has nothing to do with biological sex.
Right.
There's a BBC documentary on the subject that said at the heart of the debate is the idea that your mind can be at war with your body. And in that war, of course, it's the mind that wins. It's your feelings that define you and give you identity. And so today, kids down to kindergarten are being taught that their body tells them nothing about who they are, that they can have boy parts and not be a boy. You can have girl and not be a girl. The body's not part of their authentic self.
Right.
And again, our response to this should be, why accept such an extreme devaluation of the body?
Yeah.
I read an interview, and again, this one's not in the book because I read it later. But I read an interview with a 14-year-old girl who had lived as a trans boy for 3 years, from age 11.
Wow.
And reclaimed her identity as a girl. And the interesting thing the interesting thing is that she said the turning point came. This is an exact quote. When I realized it's not conversion therapy to learn to love your body.
Wow.
That's so cool.
I wish I'd have that for a book called Love Thy Body.
That is a perfect. Maybe she read your book. Maybe that helped. That would be kind of cool to find out, because
that's true. It would be.
That's very wise for a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
You have to realize this was a very secular, liberal website.
Oh.
Yeah, it was not a Christian website.
Wow.
And what that means is even secular people are starting to realize that transgenderism expresses body hatred. That's a term.
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned that.
And expresses body hatred. So again, the Christian answer can be presented then in positive terms. Instead of body hatred, we are saying, love thy body, accept your body as a good gift from God. Accept who God made you, because this is not a bad thing, it's a good thing.
It is.
And like I said, even secular people are starting to see that. What's at stake?
Right.
You know what? I should have looked this up before I talked to you, because I don't remember the name. But there's actually a group now of scientists, and they're calling themselves Scientists for Biological Sex.
Wow.
Wow.
And of course, what they're arguing against is the transgender view that biological sex doesn't matter, it's not part of your identity. In fact, there are groups now, you mentioned postmodernism earlier. There are postmodern theorists who are actually saying even the body is just a social construction, not gender. You know, gender, you can make an argument that aspects of gender are social construction, in the sense that gender includes things like what you wear, and there are cultures where women wear grass skirts, and there are cultures where women wear burqas. You know,
Right.
If that's part of what you think of as gender, yes, it's partly a social construction.
Right.
But now postmodernists are arguing that even sex is a social construction.
Wow.
That's why these biologists are getting together and saying, whoa, this is going to... And they form this organization of Scientists for Biological Sex.
Wow. I'm trying to think what the abbreviation of that. That's not going to make anything cool. They should have done something cool. But you addressed this in the portion that you call The Princess and the Frog. And no, Princess and the Turtle. Sorry, Princess and the Turtle. In the book, where you talk about you've got the girls being told that they should just like the princess things, and the boys are being told that they just should like the Ninja Turtle things.
Oh, that.
Yeah, and that really was so impactful, to me, because in my marriage, my husband is a very, muscular, tough guy, but when it comes time to actually like making house repairs and stuff, it actually helps to have little fingers whenever you're trying to get into those things. And so I usually take care of these things. If we're going to build a grill those little nuts and stuff. It helps to have smaller fingers. So I do all of those things. But he's made comments every time about how, he feels bad that I'm doing like the manly part of it. And I'm like, but why? I was raised by a single mom, so I've never understood that. Like, I loved the Ninja Turtles. What are you talking? Like, I would way rather watch Ninja Turtles than a princess movie. But it's interesting to me how that has affected our view of what a woman and a man, and it does affect, like you said, the cultural aspect. It's easier to say, well, this is just a construct of society, but only if you're looking at the princess and the turtle side of it. Like,
yes. Well, my chapter on transgenderism in Love Thy Body does start with an account of a young boy who did have gender dysphoria. There is such a thing as gender dysphoria.
Right.
And I called him Brandon, not his real name. But Brandon clearly had gender dysphoria when he was very young. Before he was even walking, his babysitter said to his mother, "He's too good to be a boy." By which she meant, he was sweet and compliant and gentle, and the things that we stereotypically think of associated with girls. In preschool, whenever his mother picked him up, he was playing with the little girls and not the little boys. By elementary school, he was coming to his parents repeatedly in tears and saying, I like the things girls do. I think the way girls do. God should have made me a girl. Boys talked about, sports and video games, and girls talked about feelings and relationships.
Yeah.
By age 14, he was scouring the internet for information on sex change surgery.
Wow.
So what did his parents do? First of all, they made it very clear that they loved him just the way he was. I have heard accounts of parents trying to change their kids. In fact, a friend of mine who was a former homosexual said, when I was young, I liked poetry and the arts. And my father kept trying to toughen me up by pushing me into more masculine things like sports. Brandon's parents didn't do that. They told him it's perfectly acceptable to be a sensitive, emotional, relational boy.
Yes, absolutely.
It's possible that God has equipped you for one of the caring professions like counselor, psychologist, healthcare worker. And of course, by the same token, it's perfectly fine for a woman to be a take charge, assertive, sporty, outdoorsy girl. They even took him through things like the Myers-Briggs personality test, which shows that. Oh gosh! Have you ever seen that? It shows that a woman can be at either side of the spectrum, but a man can be at either side of the spectrum. So they take the large assertive type or the gentle relational type. They took him through the gifts of the Spirit. The gifts of the Spirit are not divided by sex. You and I might think, teaching and prophecy are more masculine, but Scripture doesn't say that.
That's right.
Scripture doesn't say mercy and service are feminine. It says God gives the Holy Spirit, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, just as He chooses to each individual. So they kept affirming him in who God had made him to be, and that, yes, he was gender non-typical in the sense that he didn't fit a lot of the masculine stereotypes. But you will appreciate this. They even took him through a chapter of my book, Total Truth. Chapter 12 is on the history of concepts of masculinity and femininity.
Oh, wow.
It shows how historically contingent many of them are. And to be really brief, before the Industrial Revolution, men spent all their time with their wives and children on the family farm, the family industry. And so they were constantly being reminded of their responsibility to be a moral example, to be gentle, to be a good teacher. After the Industrial Revolution, when work was taken out of the home, for the first time, men started going to offices and factories and working as individuals, in competition with other men. So the dog-eat-dog world of early industrialism, the masculine character became redefined to fit that. and we define it as self-interested, assertive, aggressive, tough, competitive, and so on. And so I'd like to say that a lot of the masculine stereotypes that we're working with today are historically contingent. They're not necessarily eternal, universal qualities of masculinity. You know, in the Puritan day, when men were still basically working in the home with their wives and children, the definition of masculinity was duty. Duty to God and man, as one Puritan puts it. Well, you know, so the question is, how did we get from duty to God and man, you know, to Harvey Weinstein?
Right. Right. Yes.
Definitions of masculinity have changed. So with our children, we can help them to realize you don't have to feel pressure to fit in with whatever cultural definitions there are right now, because they do change and they are not necessarily universal and eternal.
Yeah, that's a great positive message too for our children. Just the love thy body. Like, it's not, you don't have to fit into this little box that society is giving you. But that's a great distance away from what we're seeing today in society, where they're actually saying, great, chop it off. Like, that to me seems much more negative than just saying to somebody, it's okay to be different. That was the expression of the day when I was growing up. That was always what we were told. It's okay to be different. But it's become such a radically different thing to say it to children now, that you can't say it's not okay for you to be different. You have to be completely separate from your body. That is a very big difference. So I know that I could ask like 80 million more questions about this. I
know, yeah.
So much of your time. So could you give us the link between all of this and the environment? You linked to that in your book as well.
Yes.
It's a really fascinating, it's a fascinating thread.
Yeah, this is something that sort of surprised me. It started out when I started trying to explain the Christian view of transgenderism to a secular friend. And the argument that really clicked was an argument based on environmentalism. And then I've since found out that it works with a lot of Christians too. It's how they get it. And you say, what's the connection, transgenderism, environment? What we've learned from the environmental movement is that if we want to avoid pollution and ecological disasters, we need to respect the structure of nature. When we intervene, it doesn't mean we can't intervene, but when we do, we need to work with the natural order, not against it.
Yeah.
We may not do as we see fit, to use Camille Paglia's phrase, when it comes to the environment. And in the same way, what Christians are saying is that we should respect our own biological nature. But the correspondence between male and female is not some evolutionary accident. It's part of the original creation that God pronounced very good. And so this makes sense to people when I say, just like we should respect that tree out there.
Right.
Respect the river enough not to dump pollution into it. In the same way, we should respect our bodies. And like I said, I use this with secular people, and they go, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." So again, it's one of those positive arguments that you can make instead of just falling back on moral condemnation, which is what we're so known for. Give the positive argument.
Oh, that's great! I love that connection. That is
really cool.
I love that.
But I do think this is an important point that I like to end with because it kind of gives the bigger picture.
Oh, absolutely.
Because sometimes people will say, and even Christians will say, wait a minute, you're making the argument that secularism gives a low view of the body. And I get people, both Christian and secular, saying, wait a minute, it's Christianity that's given us a low view of the body, right? There's a reason we have terms like puritanical. And so I can understand why some people might think that, but it means that we've lost our own Christian heritage.
Right.
The early church was born into a culture that also denigrated the material world, like modern secularism does, though for very different reasons. Back then, the early church faced philosophies like Platonism, Gnosticism, Manichaeism. Remember, Augustine was a Manichae for a while.
Sure.
Gnosticism even taught that this world was the creation of a low-level deity. They taught that there were several levels of spiritual entities, and it was an evil god, a low-level god, who created this universe. Because
I never knew that.
An evil god, in fact.
Wow.
Because no good god would get his hands dirty mucking about with matter.
Right.
So in this context, Christianity was nothing short of revolutionary. It taught that the material world was not the creation of a low-level deity, but of the supreme deity, and good God, and therefore it's intrinsically good. Mm-hmm. And it did not say the body is a prison house of the soul. In fact, the incarnation, the greatest scandal, historically speaking, was the incarnation, because it said that same supreme deity had actually entered into the material realm and taken on a body.
Right.
And so that was a scandal that the Gnostics would not accept. They did not accept that God actually entered into a human body. They thought that Jesus was just an avatar.
Yep. Just
an avatar.
It's true. And there's nothing ever new under the sun, because there's a cult today that says the same thing, that it's just it's common among cults. When Jesus was executed on a Roman cross, we might say he did escape the material realm, as Gnosticism taught we should aspire to do. But what did he do then? He came back.
Right.
In a physical body.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So from the beginning, the concept of the resurrection of the body was the supreme affirmation of the dignity of the human body. Now, and what's God going to do at the end of time? He's not going to scrap the material world as if he made a mistake.
Right.
No. Well, let's try something different. Now he's going to restore and renew this creation and create a new heavens and a new earth. The Apostles' Creed from the beginning has affirmed the resurrection of the body. So what we need to get across to people is that there's nothing like this in any other religion or philosophy. Nothing has as high a view of the physical world as Christianity.
Yeah.
And so we should be absolutely excited when we can say the Christian worldview to people. We should be so happy and so excited, and such a sense of this is this is a great, positive, wonderful, life-affirming, life-changing worldview, and we can't help talking to people about it. And so this is our attitude when we talk about, especially these cutting-edge issues like abortion and homosexuality and transgenderism. This is the attitude that we should try to convey.
Yeah, we had a couple of kind of silly questions. Yeah, to ask
is it okay? I know we've taken up so much of your time.
Yeah. I had one. If you could make a rule for a day and everyone had to follow it, what would it be?
That is an interesting question.
Right? Yeah.
The real answer is love one another.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Love you.
I love that. That one.
Yes. So in other words, world peace.
World peace. Yes. I love her answer. My answer was going to be hopscotch, like everybody else. Yeah.
If I could make a rule though for the day, I got to be honest with you, ladies, it would be that nobody could make, sell, or eat pineapple pizza.
Knew you were gonna say it.
Okay, it's got to be if you could get rid of a single word in the English language or any language. I guess it's got to be a word that would apply to all languages. What word would you destroy if you could just completely remove it from memory? It's gone. Nobody will remember it.
That's a hard one.
I know, right? I can go first though, if it helps.
Awesome. Did you
have a little time? Yeah, Becca, do you have one? You want to give her some time?
No, I can't even think of one. I'm such a lover of words. So
that's true. She has a list of 300 of her favorite words. It's a
pumpkin.
Real thing that she has.
Pumpkin is my favorite word. So I don't know what I.
So I've got a couple of words that I think that I would want to get rid of, but I would have to go with maybe ointment, because there's just something about that word. I don't like the way it sounds. Ointment. My husband pointed that out to me once. He's a hospital worker. He's like, I hate when people say ointment. Just say cream. It's a cream. So now I can't think of I can't
ointment.
The word. It's his fault.
My husband says pop instead of soda.
Oh.
And I think pop just sounds so like, I don't know, countryish.
You're going to get rid of that word? You're going to get rid of pop?
We said pop when I was a kid. Yeah.
You did say, but you say pop.
Indiana, I don't know. It's probably.
Oh, yeah.
I actually saw a regional map once that had some of these words that are original.
Oh, wow.
And who says, where do they say pop and soda? And they had several others like that too. That was interesting. It was one of those things that goes up on your Facebook feed sometimes.
I love that.
Maps of these. I know. I thought it was really interesting. Where do they say certain words?
Yeah, nice.
So thank you. You have a great night.
Thank you. Have a great
God
night.
Bless you, sister.
God
you have
bless.
a good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Recording. So, okay, we are so thankful for Nancy Pearcey joining us on the program. She gave us so much of her time. What a gracious and very fascinating sister in Christ. Like,
yes, this was so much fun.
I could have talked to her for days. She's very fascinating.
Actually, I really wanted to talk with her about like the stuff that was going on today, like just to get her perspective. I'm like, no, because we'll talk for like 2 more hours about this.
I literally had to shelf like 18,000 questions because I felt so bad that she was having to give us so much of her time. But we really appreciate it. Humblebees, I hope this was a blessing to you. Don't forget to go and check out Love Thy Body. It's on Kindle. It's on audio. I read the audio version of it. That's my favorite way to read books, but it's also, you can get it paperback, hardback. We will link to that below. Professor Pearcey has a lot of other wonderful books to check out too that we discussed in this. Any books that were discussed, I'll also link to those. So just check out the show notes below and don't forget to read those as they're amazing. And we love you, Humblebees. See you later. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for listening, Humblebees. This is Tulips and Honey. Over and out.
I think that diamond still needs a little more polish.
Yeah.